I never saw the betrayal coming, though looking back, the signs were etched into every moment like acid slowly eating through metal. My name is Marcus Davidson, and at 53, I thought I had built an unshakable foundation, a successful construction company, a marriage of 28 years to Claire, and 2 children who had grown into adults I could be proud of. But foundations, I would learn, can crack in ways invisible to the surface until the whole structure threatens to collapse. The first hairline fracture appeared during our company's annual holiday party. I was standing near the bar, watching Claire across the room as she chatted with James Peterson, our new project manager. There was nothing overtly inappropriate about their interaction, just a casual conversation between my wife and an employee. But something in the way Claire's hand lingered on James's arm when she laughed, the slight tilt of her head, sparked an uncomfortable sensation in my gut that I immediately tried to dismiss as ridiculous. "They seem to be getting along well," remarked Sarah, my assistant of 15 years, appearing at my side with a glass of wine. Her tone carried an undercurrent I couldn't quite decipher. "James has been a great addition to the team," I replied automatically, the words feeling hollow even as they left my mouth. At 42, James brought fresh energy to our projects, and his innovative approaches had already saved us considerable money on several developments. I should have felt grateful. Instead, I found myself cataloging every detail of his interaction with my wife with growing unease. The following weeks brought subtle changes that I tried to rationalize away. Claire's sudden interest in her appearance, new clothes, a different hairstyle, hours at the gym. Her phone constantly face down on surfaces, the screen lighting up with notifications she was quick to dismiss. Evening meetings that ran later than usual. Each element on its own could be dismissed, but together they formed a pattern I wasn't ready to acknowledge. "Dad, have you noticed anything different about Mom lately?" My daughter Rebecca's question over lunch one day hit too close to my unspoken concerns. At 26, she had inherited her mother's intuition along with her green eyes. "She's just been busy with her interior design projects," I deflected, studying the menu with unnecessary intensity. "You know how she gets when she's in the middle of a big project." Rebecca's skeptical expression suggested she wasn't convinced, but she didn't push further. Later that night, as I lay awake listening to Claire's steady breathing beside me, I wondered if my daughter saw something I was deliberately blinding myself to. The company's financial reports provided a welcome distraction from my personal concerns. But as I reviewed the latest figures in my office one evening, something caught my attention. Small discrepancies in the numbers, nothing major, but enough to raise questions. Projects running slightly over budget, materials costs that didn't quite align with our usual expenditures. "Sarah, can you pull the detailed expense reports for the Peterson projects?" I asked through the intercom. Within minutes, she appeared in my office, a concerned look on her face. "Marcus, there's something you should know," she began, closing the door behind her. "I've been noticing some irregularities in the accounting, particularly around James's projects. I wasn't sure whether to bring it up, but..." Her voice trailed off as my phone buzzed with a text from Claire, "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." The message landed like a stone in my stomach, especially when Sarah's next words connected another dot in the emerging pattern. "James has been staying late at the office too, almost every night this week." I dismissed Sarah with a thank you, assuring her I would look into the financial discrepancies. But as I sat alone in my darkening office, the various threads of unease began weaving themselves into a tapestry I could no longer ignore. The financial irregularities, Claire's behavioral changes, the late nights, they were all connected, weren't they? Opening my laptop, I began digging deeper into the company's records, looking for patterns I had missed. As the hours ticked by, I discovered more than just accounting discrepancies. Project delays that coincided with Claire's meetings, budget overruns that seemed to disappear into consulting fees, and a series of emails between James and various suppliers that raised serious questions about kickbacks. My phone buzzed again around midnight, another text from Claire, "Stayed at Rebecca's place. Too tired to drive home. See you tomorrow." A quick call to our daughter confirmed what I already knew: Claire wasn't there. The lie should have hurt more than it did, but instead, I felt a cold clarity descending. The foundation wasn't just cracking, it was already broken. And as I sat in my office surrounded by evidence of both personal and professional betrayal, I realized that the real question wasn't what was happening. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number for Frank Martinez, an old friend who now worked as a private investigator. My finger hovered over the call button as I wrestled with the implications of what I was about to do. Making this call would make it real, would transform suspicion into investigation, doubt into action. The office phone rang, startling me from my contemplation. At this hour, it could only be the security company. Mr. Davidson. There's been an alarm triggered at the Peterson project site. Would you like us to notify the police? I stared at my cell phone, still displaying Frank's contact information, then at the financial records scattered across my desk. No, I replied, my voice steady. I'll handle this personally. Sometimes, I would learn, the universe has a way of bringing all our suspicions to a head at once. As I grabbed my coat and car keys, I had no way of knowing that this late-night call would be the catalyst that would expose far more than just missing materials from a construction site. The night was about to get very interesting indeed. The drive to the construction site carved through the midnight darkness like a blade through silk, each mile peeling away another layer of the comfortable lies I'd wrapped around myself. My headlights caught the chain-link fence surrounding the Peterson project, the security company's sign a dull gleam in the darkness. But it wasn't the only light I saw. A faint glow emanated from the temporary office trailer, casting elongated shadows across the muddy ground. I killed the engine but left the keys in the ignition, a habit born from years of site visits. But tonight felt different. Tonight, every shadow held potential threats, every sound carried weighted meaning. The security guard should have been making his rounds, yet his booth stood empty, the logbook open on the desk. Something wasn't right. My footsteps crunched on the gravel as I approached the trailer, each step measured and deliberate. The sound of voices drifted through the thin walls, one distinctly familiar, raising goosebumps on my arms. James Peterson. The other voice was softer, feminine, and my heart seized as recognition crashed through me like a wrecking ball. Claire. I stood there, frozen in the darkness, as their conversation became clearer. The transfers are almost complete, James was saying. Once the offshore accounts are set up, we can move forward with the rest of the plan. Marcus suspects nothing. Claire's voice, so familiar yet now alien in its coldness, sent ice through my veins. He's too busy building his precious legacy to notice what's happening right under his nose. The fool actually thinks I'm saving him money with my innovative approaches. James's laugh was sharp, predatory. By the time he figures it out, we'll be long gone, and Davidson Construction will be nothing but a shell. The betrayal I'd suspected was nothing compared to the reality unfolding before me. This wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated destruction of everything I'd built, orchestrated by the two people I should have been able to trust most. The realization didn't break me as it might have hours ago. Instead, it crystallized something inside me, turning hurt into hardened resolve. I reached for my phone, opening the voice recorder app with trembling fingers. Then I moved closer to the trailer, positioning myself near the window where their shadows danced against the blinds. Every word they spoke now would become evidence of their conspiracy. What about Rebecca? Claire asked, and the mention of our daughter's name from her conspiring lips sent a surge of protective rage through me. She's been asking questions. She's not a problem, James replied dismissively. Once the company collapses and the scandal breaks, she'll be too busy supporting her devastated father to look too closely at what really happened. Besides, the paper trail we've created will make it look like Marcus was the one embezzling funds. Who would believe him over the whistleblower who exposed the corruption? The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The financial discrepancies I'd noticed weren't just theft, they were breadcrumbs leading to my own framing. Every late night, every suspicious transaction, every innovative approach had been carefully orchestrated to build a case against me. They weren't just planning to steal my money, they were planning to steal my reputation, my legacy, and my freedom. A crunch of gravel behind me shattered my concentration. I spun around to find Sarah standing there, her face pale in the darkness. "I followed you," she whispered. "I've been gathering evidence for weeks, but I needed to be sure before I came to you." For a moment, I could only stare at her, this loyal soldier in my camp who had seen the threat while I had been blind to it. "How long have you known?" "I started noticing things 3 months ago," she replied, pulling a USB drive from her pocket. "Financial records, emails, photos, it's all here. They've been planning this for almost a year, Marcus. James isn't just embezzling, he's been systematically undermining our relationships with suppliers, creating conflicts with regulatory agencies, all while building a paper trail that points to you." The weight of her words settled over me like concrete setting around my feet. A year. While I had been proudly introducing James to clients, while I had been praising his work at company meetings, while I had been blind to my wife's transformation from partner to conspirator, they had been meticulously dismantling my life. A sudden burst of laughter from the trailer made us both freeze. Through the window, I could see Claire leaning into James, their silhouettes merging in a way that should have torn my heart apart. Instead, I felt something else, something colder, more calculated, beginning to take shape in my mind. "We need to leave," Sarah whispered urgently. "We can't let them know we've discovered this." She was right, of course. But as we carefully retreated into the darkness, I wasn't running away. I was strategically withdrawing, my mind already churning through the possibilities presented by this new intelligence. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect plan, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the man they were trying to destroy. As Sarah and I drove away from the site, my phone buzzed with another text from Claire, "Hope you're sleeping well, darling. Don't worry about me, just finalizing some designs for the new project." I showed the message to Sarah, who shook her head in disbelief. "What are you going to do?" The streetlights cast intermittent shadows across my face as I considered her question. The old Marcus, the trusting, naive man who believed in the sanctity of marriage and the bond of business partnership, might have confronted them immediately, might have demanded explanations, might have tried to salvage what was already irreparably broken. But that Marcus had died in the darkness outside that trailer. The man who emerged was someone else entirely, someone who understood that sometimes, the best revenge isn't served hot with passion, but cold with precision. "First," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside, "we're going to pay a visit to Frank Martinez. Then we're going to give Claire and James exactly what they want, the perfect opportunity to spring their trap. And when they do..." I left the sentence unfinished as we pulled into my office parking lot. The night was far from over, and the game that was about to begin would require every ounce of cunning I possessed. But as I glanced at the USB drive in Sarah's hand, the key to unraveling their entire conspiracy, I felt something I hadn't expected: anticipation. They wanted to play chess with my life. Fine. But they were about to learn they weren't the only ones who could think several moves ahead. Dawn crept across the city like a guilty conscience as I sat in Frank Martinez's dimly lit office, the night's revelations settling into my bones like old wounds finally making themselves known. The private investigator's face remained impassive as he reviewed the evidence on Sarah's USB drive, but I could see the slight tightening around his eyes that betrayed his professional concern transforming into personal outrage. "Jesus Christ, Marcus," he finally muttered, pushing back from his computer. "This isn't just corporate espionage. They've constructed an entire parallel narrative of your life, building it piece by piece like a coffin meant to bury you alive." The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Every document we examined felt like another nail being driven into the carefully crafted facade of my existence. Financial records had been subtly altered, creating a ghost trail of transactions that painted me as the architect of my own company's downfall. Emails had been fabricated, timestamps manipulated, all designed to create a compelling story of my corruption. "The level of detail is impressive," Sarah commented, her voice carrying a tremor of exhaustion after our sleepless night. She spread photographs across Frank's desk, surveillance shots of James and Claire meeting with various players in their scheme, each image a new betrayal captured in high resolution. "Impressive isn't the word I'd use," I replied, picking up a photo of Claire laughing over dinner with James, her hand resting intimately on his wrist. The timestamp showed it was taken the night of our wedding anniversary, when she'd claimed to be visiting her sister in Phoenix. Meticulous. Calculated. Like watching someone dig your grave while measuring you for the perfect fit. Frank's chair creaked as he leaned forward, his investigator's instincts homing in on my tone. "You're taking this remarkably well, Marcus. Most men I've seen in your position would be halfway to either a breakdown or a murder charge by now." A bitter laugh escaped me, surprising in its hollowness. "Would you believe I feel almost grateful?" The words tasted strange on my tongue, but they carried a truth I was only beginning to understand. They've shown me exactly who they are, stripped away every pretense, every lie I've been telling myself. It's clarifying, in a way I never expected. Sarah's hand found my shoulder, a gesture of support that nearly broke through my carefully constructed composure. "Marcus." "No," I cut her off, standing to pace the length of Frank's office. "You don't understand. For months, I've been feeling something slipping away, like trying to hold on to water with cupped hands. Every strange comment from Claire, every suspicious financial report, every late-night meeting, they were all pieces of a puzzle I refused to see. Now I turned to face them, feeling the strength of certainty straightening my spine. Now I can see the whole picture, and that knowledge is power. Frank nodded slowly, a predatory smile crossing his weathered face. "And what do you plan to do with that power?" The question hung in the air as I approached his window, watching the city wake up below. Somewhere out there, Claire was probably just rising, preparing to play her role as the devoted wife for another day. James would be heading to the office, ready to continue his performance as the innovative project manager saving the company money. "They've created an elaborate trap," I said, my reflection in the glass overlaying the cityscape like a ghost. "Every detail has been carefully planned, every escape route mapped out. They're expecting me to either remain blind until it's too late, or to react exactly as you said, with emotional violence that would only serve to validate their narrative." "So we spring the trap," Sarah suggested, her voice carrying a hint of steel I'd never heard before. "But we do it on our terms." I turned back to them, seeing my own growing resolve mirrored in their expressions. "Frank, I need you to do something that goes against every investigative instinct you have. I need you to be sloppy." His eyebrows rose questioningly. "Make them aware they're being watched, but not by whom. Let them catch glimpses of surveillance, hear whispers of investigation. They've planned for every contingency except one, the possibility that their target might become the hunter." "Psychological warfare," Frank mused, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Make them paranoid, start seeing threats in shadows. Force them to accelerate their timeline." "Exactly." I picked up another photograph, this one showing James meeting with someone I recognized as a regulatory official. They've built their plan on the assumption that they control the flow of information, that they can dictate the pace of events. We're going to take that control away from them. Sarah was already typing on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. "I can start laying our own breadcrumbs. Small discrepancies in the false trail they've created, subtle enough that they might miss them at first, but damaging enough to their narrative that when they do notice, they'll have to choose," I finished. "Either abandon months of careful planning to fix the problems, or risk their entire scheme unraveling at the worst possible moment." The sun had fully risen now, painting Frank's office in shades of gold that felt mockingly cheerful given our dark purpose. My phone buzzed, a message from Claire, "Made you coffee before I left. Have a great day, darling." The casual cruelty of her continued deception should have cut deep, but instead, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. Every false word, every pretense of normalcy, was now another weapon in my arsenal. "I should get to the office," I said, gathering my coat. "Can't let them suspect anything's changed." Frank caught my arm as I headed for the door. "Marcus, be careful. The most dangerous moment in any hunt is when the prey realizes it's become the predator. They might abandon subtlety for something more direct." I met his gaze steadily, seeing in it the weight of experience with similar cases gone wrong. "I know. That's counting on it. Because when they do..." I let the sentence hang, feeling the cold certainty of my plan settling into place like a key turning in a lock. Sarah stood, clutching her laptop like a shield. "I'll head in separately, start implementing our countermeasures." "But Marcus..." She hesitated, concern etching lines around her eyes. "How are you going to face them? Knowing what you know?" The question gave me pause, not because I didn't have an answer, but because the answer revealed something about myself I was only beginning to understand. The man who had discovered his wife's betrayal last night had died in the shadows of that construction site. What emerged was something else entirely, something forged in the crucible of betrayal and tempered by the cold calculation of revenge. With a smile, I replied, opening the door to face the new day. "After all, they've taught me so well how to wear a mask. It's time I showed them just how good a student I can be." As I stepped out into the morning light, I felt the weight of the role I would now have to play, the trusting husband, the oblivious business owner, the perfect mark for their elaborate con. But beneath that mask, something darker and more powerful was taking shape, something that understood that sometimes the best revenge isn't just served cold. It's served with a smile. The morning light streamed through my office windows, casting long shadows across the desk where I'd built my empire, now transformed into a stage for the most crucial performance of my life. Each tick of the clock marked another moment in this elaborate dance of deception, where every smile, every casual gesture, had to be calibrated with the precision of a master watchmaker. Claire's morning coffee sat untouched on my desk, her lipstick stain on the rim like a crimson wound against the white ceramic. Once, such intimate traces of her presence would have warmed me. Now, they were just props in our shared theater of lies, each one carefully placed to maintain the illusion of normalcy she thought I still believed in. "The regulatory inspection reports just came in," Sarah announced, entering my office with a stack of papers. Her voice carried its usual professional tone, but her eyes conveyed the hidden meaning we both understood. These weren't just reports, they were the first threads we would pull to unravel James's carefully woven web. "Anything concerning?" I asked, maintaining the facade of casual interest while my pulse quickened with anticipation. The game was beginning. "Several irregularities in the Peterson projects," she replied, laying out the documents. "The inspector noted some unusual variances from our approved plans." Right on cue, James appeared in my doorway, his confident smile now reading like a poker tell I couldn't believe I'd missed for so long. "Morning, Marcus. Everything all right? You look a bit tired." The irony of his concern almost made me laugh. Instead, I gestured to the reports with just the right amount of worry creasing my brow. "Some issues with the regulatory inspection. Nothing major, I'm sure, but..." I watched the micro-expressions flicker across his face, concern, calculation, the briefest flash of panic before his mask slipped back into place. "I'll take a look," he offered smoothly. "Those inspectors can be overzealous sometimes." "Actually," I interjected, savoring the moment, "I think we should bring in an independent auditor. Just to be safe. Sarah, could you reach out to Blackwood Associates?" The name dropped like a stone into still water. Blackwood Associates, known for their forensic accounting expertise, a detail I knew would send ripples through James's carefully constructed plans. His facade cracked for just a moment, a hairline fracture in his confident demeanor. "Is that really necessary?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "It seems like an excessive response to a routine inspection." I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself to appear slightly distracted. "Better safe than sorry, wouldn't you agree? Claire always says I worry too much about these things." The mention of her name was deliberate, a subtle reminder of the connections he thought he controlled. James's phone buzzed in his pocket, right on schedule. Sarah's carefully orchestrated leak about the potential audit would be reaching our carefully selected industry contacts now. The whispers would begin, the questions would start circulating, and the pressure would begin to mount. "Speaking of Claire," I continued, maintaining the pretense of casual conversation, "remind me to thank her for the coffee. She's been so thoughtful lately." The irony of the statement hung in the air like smoke, visible only to those who knew where to look for the fire. James excused himself shortly after, his departure marked by a subtle urgency that would have been imperceptible just days ago. Once alone, Sarah closed the door and activated the white noise generator Frank had installed, another piece of theater, but one meant for different eyes. "They'll notice the discrepancies in the regulatory reports by this afternoon," she confirmed. "The timestamps on the modified documents create a paper trail leading exactly where we want them to look." I nodded, finally allowing myself to take a sip of the coffee Claire had left, my first taste of her deception for the day. "And the offshore account monitoring? Frank's contact at the SEC is already flagging suspicious patterns. They'll start asking questions within the week." The pieces were moving, the trap beginning to close, but not around its intended target. Yet beneath the cold satisfaction of seeing our plan unfold, something darker churned in my gut. The man I'd been, the one who had built this company on trust and integrity, was dying by inches, replaced by someone who wielded deception like a scalpel. My phone lit up with a text from Claire, "Lunch today? I miss you." The words blurred before my eyes, each character a testament to her ability to lie with such casual grace. I thought of all our shared meals, the intimate conversations, the life we built together, now revealed as an elaborate construction of false fronts and hidden passages. "Marcus?" Sarah's voice pulled me back from the abyss of memory. "Are you sure you want to meet with her? We could make an excuse." "No," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Every performance needs its audience. And Claire has always been my most appreciative viewer." I typed back a response, each word carefully chosen, "Of course, darling. The usual place." The usual place, where she'd first told me she loved me, where we'd celebrated countless anniversaries, where she now regularly met James when she thought I was working late. The symmetry was almost poetic. As I prepared for this latest act in our ongoing drama, I caught my reflection in the office window. The man staring back at me was both familiar and strange, a palimpsest where new lines of hardness were being written over old expressions of trust. The transformation wasn't just in my actions or my plans, but in the very marrow of my being. "What do you see?" Sarah asked softly, noticing my contemplation. "The death of innocence," I replied, straightening my tie with mechanical precision. "And the birth of something else entirely." The morning sun had climbed higher, casting no shadows now, a reminder that the darkest deceptions often happen in broad daylight. As I gathered my things for my lunch date with Claire, I felt the weight of the role I was about to play settle around my shoulders like a familiar coat. Let them think they were the masters of manipulation. Let them believe their plan was proceeding exactly as designed. They had taught me well, perhaps too well, the art of wearing masks. But they had forgotten one crucial detail: sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that learns to perfectly mimic its prey. The restaurant's familiar warmth wrapped around me like a lover's embrace turned strangling hold as I watched Claire approach our usual table. 28 years of marriage had taught me every nuance of her movement, every subtle tell in her expression. Now, that intimate knowledge felt like a curse, forcing me to see the precise calibration of her deception in every gesture. "Darling," she smiled, leaning in to kiss my cheek. Her perfume, new, something I'd never smelled before, lingered between us like an unspoken confession. I've missed you. We've both been so busy lately. The irony of her words tasted like ash in my mouth. I studied her face as she settled into her chair, noting the slight tension around her eyes, the carefully manufactured warmth in her smile. How many times had she performed this dance of devotion while orchestrating my destruction? The regulatory audit has me concerned, I offered, watching her reaction with the detached fascination of a scientist observing a specimen under glass. James seems worried too. A flicker, there and gone, like lightning in a summer storm. Her hands moved to the water glass, a deliberate gesture I now recognized as one of her tells. I'm sure it's nothing serious, she soothed, her voice carrying that note of protective concern that had once made me feel so cherished. You always handle these things brilliantly. The waiter approached, and we performed the ritual of ordering, a choreographed routine of normalcy that felt obscene in its familiarity. I ordered the salmon she knew I loved, watching her lips curve in approval. She chose the salad she always claimed was her favorite, though I now knew she preferred richer fare when dining with James. Rebecca called this morning, I mentioned casually, laying the first tripwire. She's worried about you. Says you've seemed distant lately. Claire's mask slipped for just a fraction of a second, a microscopic fracture in her perfect facade. Did she? I'll have to call her. Things have just been so hectic with the new project. The new project. Such an elegant euphemism for the systematic dismantling of my life's work. I took a sip of wine, letting the silence stretch between us like a tightening garrote. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, right on schedule. Speaking of projects, I continued, carefully laying the foundation for what was to come, the board is calling an emergency meeting tomorrow. Something about irregularities in the offshore accounts. The color drained from her face so subtly that anyone else might have missed it. But I had become a connoisseur of her fears, a sommelier of her subtle tells. Offshore accounts, she echoed, her voice steady but her fingers widening around her water glass. I didn't know we had offshore accounts. Neither did I replied, allowing a note of worried confusion to color my tone. James suggested we bring in forensic accountants. Blackwood Associates. Have you heard of them? The name landed like a depth charge, sending ripples through the careful composure she'd maintained. I watched them spread across her features, concern, calculation, the first seeds of genuine fear taking root. Marcus, she began, reaching across the table to take my hand. The gesture, once so natural, now felt like an act of violence. You're working too hard. Let James handle the audit. That's why you brought him in, isn't it? To take some of the burden off your shoulders. The tenderness in her voice was exquisite in its calculation. I squeezed her hand gently, feeling the wedding ring that had become nothing more than a prop in our shared performance. You're right, of course. You always know what's best for me. My phone buzzed again, another message from Sarah, this one carrying the news I'd been waiting for. The trap was set, the pieces in motion. Tomorrow, James would discover the carefully planted evidence of my own apparent embezzlement, the false trail that would lead him to believe his plan was working perfectly. I should get back to the office, Claire said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I have a client meeting this afternoon. A client meeting. Another elegant lie in her lexicon of deception. I knew she would be running straight to James, warning him about the audit, about Blackwood Associates, about the board meeting. Each piece of information a carefully placed landmine in their path. As I watched her leave, her figure cutting through the restaurant with practiced grace, I felt something crystallize inside me. The last traces of the man who had loved her unconditionally, who had built his life around her happiness, crumbled away like ancient parchment exposed to air. In his place stood someone else, someone forged in the crucible of betrayal, tempered by the cold fire of revenge. This new self looked at the world through eyes stripped of illusion, seeing not the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about love and loyalty, but the raw machinery of power and manipulation beneath. My phone lit up with a final message from Sarah. James is panicking. He's trying to access the sealed records. Perfect. Let him pull that thread. Let him follow the breadcrumbs we'd laid out so carefully. Each step he took to protect himself would only draw the noose tighter around both their necks. I paid the bill, our last lunch together, though Claire didn't know it yet, and stepped out into the afternoon sun. Tomorrow would bring chaos, recrimination, the first visible cracks in their carefully constructed plan. But for now, I savored the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't the knife in your back, but the smile on your face as you feel it slide in. The game wasn't just about revenge anymore. It had become something more profound, a crucible of transformation, burning away the last vestiges of naive trust and forging something harder, colder, more capable of surviving in a world where love and betrayal danced so closely they became indistinguishable. As I walked back to the office, I thought about the man I'd been just days ago, trusting, vulnerable, blind. He was gone now, as surely as if he'd died in that construction site trailer. What remained was something else entirely, something that understood that in the game of power and betrayal, the most dangerous player isn't the one who strikes first, but the one who waits, watches, and learns to turn their opponent's weapons against them. Tomorrow would begin the endgame. And I was finally ready to play. The boardroom gleamed like polished bone in the morning light, its sterile perfection a fitting stage for the final act of our tragedy. I sat at the head of the table, watching the digital clock tick toward 9, each luminous number marking another heartbeat closer to revelation. The leather of my chair, once a throne of achievement, now felt like the electric chair of execution. The only question was, whose? Sarah's message lit up my phone. They're here. I could hear them in the hallway, Claire's heels striking a staccato rhythm against marble, James's slower, heavier tread behind her. Their voices carried through the door, urgent whispers wrapped in manufactured calm. The sound transported me back to that night at the construction site, when I'd first heard the true cadence of their conspiracy. They entered together, a united front of practiced innocence. Claire's eyes found mine first, her smile a masterwork of concerned affection. James followed, his confidence wavering almost imperceptibly as he took in the room, the stack of folders before each seat, the laptop connected to the projector, the three unfamiliar faces wearing Justice Department badges. "What's going on, Marcus?" Claire's voice carried just the right note of worried support. The board meeting wasn't supposed to be until next week. I gestured to the empty seats, noting how they unconsciously chose chairs close together. "Some matters couldn't wait," I replied, my tone carrying the weight of 28 years of shared breakfasts, anniversary dinners, and carefully crafted lies. The forensic audit revealed some interesting patterns. James's hand twitched toward his phone, a move I recognized from countless hours of surveillance footage. "Surely this level of escalation isn't necessary," he began, but the words died in his throat as the projector hummed to life. The screen filled with emails, their plans, their careful orchestration of my downfall laid bare in crisp digital clarity. I watched their faces as recognition dawned, as the magnitude of their miscalculation became devastatingly clear. "It's fascinating," I continued, my voice steady despite the thundering in my chest, "how betrayal leaves its own forensic evidence. Like rings in a tree, marking years of slow corruption." Claire's mask cracked first, a fissure of panic splitting her perfect composure. "Marcus, I can explain." "Can you explain the offshore accounts?" I interrupted, each word a carefully placed blade. "The falsified regulatory documents. The systematic embezzlement designed to frame me as the architect of my own company's destruction." James stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. "This is absurd. You have no proof." "Actually," Sarah interjected, sliding a USB drive across the polished table, "we have everything. Every meeting, every transaction, every carefully orchestrated step of your plan." She nodded to the Justice Department officials. Including your conversation at the construction site about framing Marcus for your crimes. The color drained from Claire's face as the recording began to play, her own voice, cold and calculating, planning my destruction. The sound filled the room like poison gas, suffocating the last vestiges of our shared pretense. 28 years, I said softly, finally allowing the raw edge of pain to surface in my voice. 28 years of marriage, and you couldn't even make it through dinner last night without lying to my face. You don't understand, Claire whispered, tears welling in her eyes, real ones now, not the carefully manufactured drops she'd perfected over months of deception. We never meant to get caught. I finished for her. No, I suppose you didn't. That was your first mistake, underestimating the man you were trying to destroy. James's facade finally shattered completely, panic replacing his practiced confidence. This is entrapment, he sputtered, looking wildly between the Justice Department officials. You can't. It's not entrapment when you document your own crimes so meticulously, one of the officials replied, standing to present their badges formally. James Peterson, Claire Davidson, you're both under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted embezzlement. As they read the Miranda rights, I watched Claire's face, really watched it, for perhaps the first time in years. Behind the crumbling mask of the woman who had shared my bed and plotted my ruin, I caught a glimpse of something else. Recognition. Not just of her failure, but of the man I had become, someone capable of orchestrating their downfall with the same cold precision they had planned mine. The company, James tried one last gambit, his voice breaking. You're destroying everything you built. No, I cut him off, standing to my full height. I'm preserving it. The board has already approved the restructuring plan. Every project you compromised will be audited, every client relationship you damaged will be rebuilt. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. You see, while you were busy trying to bury me, I was learning how to rise from the ashes. As they were led away in handcuffs, Claire turned back one last time. I did love you once, she whispered, tears cutting channels through her perfect makeup. I believe you, I replied, surprising myself with the truth of it. But love without loyalty is just another weapon in the arsenal of betrayal. The door closed behind them with a final, decisive click. Sarah touched my arm gently. Are you all right? I looked around the boardroom, the space where I had built dreams, made decisions, trusted the wrong people. But instead of seeing the shadows of betrayal, I saw something else, possibility. The possibility of rebuilding, not just my company, but myself. You know what the interesting thing about a phoenix is? I asked, watching the morning sun paint the city skyline in shades of rebirth. It doesn't just rise from the ashes. It's transformed by them. Made stronger, more magnificent, more capable of soaring than before. I gathered my papers, each movement deliberate and purposeful. The man who had walked into that construction site trailer days ago had died there, but what emerged was something else entirely, something forged in the crucible of betrayal and tempered by the cold fire of justice. The game isn't over, Sarah observed, her voice carrying a note of concern. No, I agreed, feeling the weight of the future settling around my shoulders like a well-tailored suit. But for the first time in longer than I can remember, I'm playing by my own rules. As I walked out of the boardroom, I felt the last chains of my old life fall away. Claire and James had taught me well, perhaps too well, the art of strategic warfare. But they had forgotten one crucial detail: sometimes the most complete victory isn't in destroying your enemies, but in transcending the battlefield entirely. The phoenix doesn't seek revenge against the fire that burned it. It simply rises, transformed, and soars beyond its reach. And so would I.